Hey all, it's David Ducker coming back at you. And before I get started, I want to dedicate this video to Ander Wood, the main man, the barbarian chieftain of the YouTube RPG Brigade. He is back. This is my first video I'm filming after him returning from, as he said, a long sojourn in a land most foul. A land most foul. So I want to dedicate this video to him. I might as well dedicate my whole channel to him, since he's a reason I started getting into videos. But I'm not going to, because I'm going to try to spread some hype around to other people as well. Throw out more shoutouts in the future. I've been negligent in doing so. But this video, the topic is going to be on mass combat. I think Ander would be proud of that. Ander is all about combat, whether it's massive or minimal. So I love mass combat. I try to include it in every single game I run, and multiple times if I can get away with it, if the story will allow me to do so. I was discussing with someone else in the brigade, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I was talking to him about co-GMs. And when you should bring someone in to help you run scenes to take over NPCs or armies for mass combat. And he said, oh yeah, that would help. Mass combats are really tough. I was saying, yeah, mass combats aren't tough. Mass combats are awesome. They're no more tough than any large scene, be it a large gathering of NPCs, because that's all it is. That's all a mass combat is, just a large gathering of NPCs, of like-minded individuals. It's just that they're trying to kill each other, that's all. So it's just about as tough as that party scene when they're throwing a party, a ball. I believe in Vampire they call that Elysium. So I wanted to go over a couple of anecdotes. It's largely an anecdotal video to hopefully get you some inspiration and techniques on what I've done in the past to streamline it. Because some systems don't do mass combat well, or they just omit any rules for doing it at all. Most notably, Pathfinder, the core book omits mass combat entirely, and if they have a supplement, I believe it's going to be a very, very clunky rule set. It's going to be very, very kind of long-winded and complicated. Which you don't need. Mass combat should be actually simpler than regular combat, if anything. And one system I could point to and hold up as an example would be a Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones role-playing game. Right in the core book, mass combat rules, it's the same basic rules as personal combat, just a couple little differences. So that would be, as written, my go-to for mass combat. But in general, mass combat, if it's omitted, I just homebrew it into the game, as I've done with Pathfinder on many occasions, or I've done with Rogue Trader as well. And you just homebrew it in, use a simplified structure of their regular combat engine, and it all works out great. So I guess I'll quickly review why mass combats are awesome and when to use them. So why they're awesome is they're epic in scope, in scale, in importance. They're so important to so many people's lives and to the history of your nation or province or star sector or whatever it is. Battles are important. They shape history. They happen for a reason. So that right there is why they're awesome. They're also awesome because anything could happen. You could find yourself surrounded by 10 enemies or 10 allies. Your side could win or lose depending on the courage of their troops or the knowledge of their commanders or just whether it rains that day or not. That could be a major deciding factor in some conflicts. So anything could happen. It's loud, it's boisterous, it's important. So right there, it's easy to see why you should include them. Now, when should you include them? Well, I've in general, you should include them as a climax to a storyline, or yeah, that climax. You might have denouements after that, or you might have a rising series of climaxes as a chain of battles forges your campaign forward. You shouldn't have too many just because they take so long to set up. The other time I've used them is in the very first session. I do the mass combat and then slowly play out the results of that. And as this happens, in the aftermath of the battle, and the chaos, the confusion, the destruction, that can be a great time to introduce your world slowly, because things are going to happen slow after the battle. You've got to journey away from the battle site back to the important locales. People have to recoup and gather their forces again. Excuse me. So I've used that before as the very first session, mass combat. You're in the thick of it. Don't die. Try to survive. Try to help your side to win. And then we find out slowly what the world is, what the people involved in that battle were, why it happened. So that can be a great scene first off the bat. It's a little bit more of an advanced technique. It requires a certain style of game, but I'd highly recommend it. Try to work it in if you can. Much better than meeting in a tavern. Now that's an interesting story. We all met on the field of battle. Sometimes that's the way, you know, the party will sunder as well on the field of battle. But that's a bit about when to do it. You know, and a battle, you should build up to it. If you're using it as a climax, you should be building up to it precipitously, slowly, over the course of probably months of playing, you know, hours and hours of session time. Introduce each of the you know, generals, the sub-commanders, their units, and just get the players really committed in this battle. Oh, my one friend is a knight. He's riding under Sir Theobald, and my other friend in the temple is also going to bless them before the battle. I hope nothing happens to him, Gerard the cleric. You know, all my friends are going off to war. How could I not go off to war as well? You know, I'd be abandoning all of them. You know, even the Thieves Guild can go off as scouts, assassins, spies, camp followers. They're just there to pick the bones after the battle. So a million reasons that the Thieves Guild could be going as well. So I'll give now a couple of anecdotes about mass combats I've run. Let's start off Legends of the Seven Sands. I had 2 big battles, and they were quite excellent. First battle, the Battle of Tortuga. Yeah. And what the situation was is the Pharaoh and his empire were being harassed by some revolutionaries, rebels, pirates, and they couldn't find their hidden base to strike them down. Eventually, it turned out that the hidden base was on the back of an enormous desert tortoise, a whole city, a pirate city on the back of the tortoise, hence the name Tortuga. Of course, those of you familiar with history will know the famous Tortuga pirate base from the Caribbean. I think they might have used it for Pirates of the Caribbean, the movie, as well. But yes, Tortuga means tortoise in Spanish. So, not the best choice of name, and yet at the same time, what a great choice of name. I'm certainly proud of myself. So, the city is on the back of this tortoise, the lush and green. The pirates are in cahoots with the Druid faction, and the Empire has, in this case, the important troops were the Royal Army, because in Speria they had a standing army, as well as the Sky Guild, flying sky ships. which are essentially dirigibles. They're sailing ships hung beneath enormous balloons full of cavorite gas, which is a magical substance, obviously. So we had this, the other faction that was involved on the side of the pharaoh were his wizard's cabal, the Tower of Imhotep, Wizard's Tower as well. So there's being an Arabian and Egyptian style game. They have flying carpets. So they're acting as aerial cavalry. So we had this great scene set up. Some of the heroes had already infiltrated Tortuga, and some of them were flying with this fleet of sky ships to attack the city. So half the group were sabotaging the defenses of Tortuga because it had catapults and ballistae on its back. And the other half were riding, with the army, were flying in with them to assault Tortuga proper. It was great because we got to intro both sides. They got to see, the city, the civilian presence of the city, all the mamas and daughters there, how the Druids had made it lush and green and tropical, which was a good contrast against the Pharaoh's city, which is just dusty, brown, sandstone. And then we got to contrast, their happy lives going around and just living their lives versus the troops who were coming in and how they were, scared of battle and looking forward to the battle and, apprehensive if they were going to survive or not. So eventually, of course, the skyship fleet shows up on the horizon, this fleet of sky ships moving in. The Druids on the tortoise mobilized themselves, conjured a sandstorm in the path of the fleet. The Wizards' Cabal launches their flying carpets out. They all have staves, and they're hurling fireballs into the city, blasting lightning bolt, dropping cloud kill spells, and swarms of stinging insects. Czar, the transmuter, the master of transmutations, grew to enormous size. He started stomping buildings and just crushing people. So we had great involvement from the wizards. We had the catapults going off in the city itself, the militia mobilizing with their archers. The sky ships, as they're coming in, of course the sandstorm is jostling them. I think it did blow two of them off course, and they crashed before they even got there. But then they penetrate the sandstorm, and they start dropping down into the city, dropping their troops, trying to take the docks from the pirates that are holding it, disgorging troops. The whole city turned into a battleground. Civilians are falling and dying and holding their babies, screaming. The Spirian army is coming in their scale mail with their kopeshes. The Druids are mobilizing. I believe Josh had the best entrance as he got his skyship positioned directly over the Druid ziggurat, and he had acquired a land shark or sand shark, a bulette, and mounted, and he was a necromancer, his character, and he had actually ritually killed it and raised it as undead, filled the inside of it with skeletons like a tank. So he turned it into kind of a undead battle tank, and he rode it off his skyship onto the top of the Druid ziggurat, starts disgorging, like literally vomiting up skeletons, assembling themselves as they hit the ground and coming up with scimitars to fight the Druids. So he had the best entrance easily of everyone. And just the battle scene itself was so epic. The city was divided into 5 districts, and so I tracked the 5 land wars going on, as well as the battles in the sky. So I had essentially artillery and archers versus the sky ships and the wizards cabal, who were all the aerial units I was tracking. And, it went smoothly. It was fast, furious, fun, great scene. And the long-term repercussions were also wonderful. Josh confronted the high priest of the Druids and actually hurled him from the ziggurat off of the tortoise's back onto the sand below. Because the ziggurat is perched on just the edge of the shell. So that was a dramatic confrontation with the enemy commander. Meanwhile, Mike's character snuck into the pirate castle, which is in the center of the tortoise's back, and assassinated the king of the pirates, Khalil, and the leader of the Spirian Guard, Graham Marshal Balian, was killed during the battle because James abandoned him to fight a duel with Sir William, and Sir William walloped him and killed him since James abandoned him. So that had long-term repercussions just because Balian was such an important character. But I don't put plot armor on anybody, so critical hits will be rolled, and if you're not there to help him, he's going to die. So they achieved certain of their objectives, but they didn't follow through on their promise to stand beside Balian and protect him, and he was killed. So even in victory, there was that defeat. Actually, officially, I don't know if it was a victory, because the pirates did successfully repel the army, and both sides were decimated, unfortunately, which again had long-term repercussions, because it takes a long time to raise an army. It requires tremendous resources in terms of population that after this battle neither side really had. They didn't have an army, but they both still had their bases intact. So this led to some very radical policies on both fronts. The pirates ended up recruiting the deep desert elves and some Viking mercenaries from across the sea, whereas the city itself instituted an inquisition and started conscripting troops from the regular population. So the long-term repercussions of the battle were tremendous. We had two major characters died, the Pirate King as well as Balian. We had both sides of populations decimated. So the importance was huge, enormous importance. And the actual scene was so dramatic and exciting. So many things they could do. Do you want to lead troops and try to take the city? Do you want to go and assassinate the leaders, which is what they did? Or do you want to, Josh especially could get a magic carpet and fly through the city, aiding troops wherever he could, exposing himself to artillery fire. So there was so much. And once Balian fell, of course, that's one of the reasons the Royal Guard was repulsed. They no longer had anyone to lead them. The pirates didn't either, but the pirates couldn't really retreat because this was their home. So there was they couldn't retreat, they couldn't surrender because the crime of piracy demands death as its penance. So they knew they'd get no mercy if they surrendered. This led to a really exciting battle and huge repercussions later on. So, I think that battle took at least 3 sessions. And all 3 were very, very fun, very active. And, when I hear somebody is afraid to run that kind of scene because of the complexity involved, I'm just like, make it simple. Mechanically, make it really simple, because you can get so much narratively out of it that it's easily worth it, even if it is a little more complicated than usual. And it's not going to be that much more complicated than usual. Turn each army into a single creature, with your mechanical rule set, whatever that is. I'll go through. I'll tell another anecdote. I'll use the Legend of the Seven Sands again. The finale of the campaign, If the Battle of Tortuga capped off our first year of play, so that was 50 sessions to set this battle up. Then the next battle, Battle of Pisquia, was the series finale. This took another year to set up, or maybe 6 months, give or take. And this was the end of the campaign. So Tortuga had, as I said, allied themselves with the Deep Desert Elves. They elected a new pirate king. The high priest actually survived his fall off of the tortoise due to Pathfinder falling rules being so lax. You can just survive in ridiculous falls according to the rule set. So he did, obviously. Because, I'm not one to break the rules. The rules are the laws of physics in your world. If you start breaking the laws of physics, you're in deep trouble. You need to be consistent with the laws of your world, which means the rule set you're using. That's a tangent, though. So Tortuga aligned themselves with the Vikings across the sea. They allied themselves with the Deep Desert Elves, and they took on Crusaders from the south who were being persecuted by the Inquisition in the actual city of Speria by the Pharaoh. So now they had these three other armies to back them up. The Desert Elves, of course, have rocks, enormous eagles, catapults, and war carriages on their back. So that was a great faction to bring into this battle. They also had Fremen-style sandworm riders, which was tremendous. The Vikings, of course, had their longships. So Tortuga decided to assault Pisquia, which is the city on the sea. It's between the desert and the sea. It's right on the coast. So they're assaulting it, both from land and sea. And so the Pharaoh and the player characters had to had to launch their counterattack. So this time, not only did they have their skyship fleet, or what remained of it after the first battle, but they also had sand ships, which was essentially sailing ships that could magically sail through sand. This was a big fixture of the campaign since day one. They just couldn't use them in the first battle because the tortoise is not right on the sand. It's standing on the sand. Its legs are quite long just because it's so massive. So in this battle, they found out about it from a scout, and they calculated that, if they left, by the time they assembled their army and sailed to Pisquia, the battle would already be in progress. So they were going as essentially reinforcements for Pisquia to save them. They also recruited some mercenaries of their own from the Greek area. So the Vikings are sailing in, but also some Greek-style triremes are coming in to try and stop them by sea. This was Aaron that introduced his character as a trireme captain. And they recruited some Pegasus knights from the Greco-Roman area as well. So a bunch of knights on Pegasi, which was great. So they had their sand ship fleet, their sky ship fleet. They even they recruited a blue dragon as well, an enormous, vast blue dragon. So they're sailing in, and they see the city under siege. The tortoise is stomping through the city, firing off its catapults, disgorging troops. The pirate fleet is taking the beach. The Vikings have engaged at the triremes. And then they sail in with their sand ships, which have to go up against the sand worms, as well as their sky ships and Pegasus knights, and the Wizards Cabal, those who survived the first battle, versus the Deep Desert Elves on their rocks and giant eagles. I believe we also actually had a faction of lizard folk riding pterodactyls in this battle as well. And they'd come up from the south and been persecuted by the Inquisition, and thus joined with the rebels, the pirates. So you can see again the long-term consequences, that originally these factions were aligned so differently than they came out in the final battle. But through the player actions, allegiances shifted radically. So certain factions, like the Desert Elves, they could have brought the Desert Elves onto their side, but because they forced the pirates to need them so badly, and that they aggressively recruited them. Also, the players did not attempt to negotiate with the Desert Elves at all. They were actually quite harsh to the Desert Elves. So again, long-term repercussions that finally play out in these massive battles. And it might sound, it sounds a little ridiculous when you lay it out. When you've got Pegasus Knights and elves on giant eagles and lizard folk on giant pterodactyls and Vikings and triremes and giant tortoise and sand ships and sandworms and fighting in the streets and wizards on flying magic carpets. It can sound too big, too ridiculous, too overwhelming. But again, you got to remember, it took 2 years to set up. The first battle had half as many factions involved because we only had half as much time to introduce factions, set them up. Because each of these factions needs to be introduced slowly to the players. You can't introduce more than 1 or 2 factions per session. And then you've got to spend another 1 or 2 sessions exploring them and getting to know their NPCs that are power players with them. So at the end of the day, you end up with so much because you built up, slowly over time. A drop of water in the bucket every session, and then after 2 years, you end up with this great cistern that you can draw upon. So it sounds huge and epic and ridiculous even, but that's because you've invested the time so it can all make sense at the end of the day. And you can say, oh yeah, I know who all these guys are. I know why they're involved in the battle. And in some cases, there's hesitation. Josh's character was great friends with the lizard folk, especially their priestess, who's originally a player character. Josh's girlfriend actually originally played the lizard folk priestess, but she left, so her character became an NPC, which is fine. But then when the Inquisition came down on them for worshiping Quetzalcoatl instead of Ra, they had to join the pirates or they'd be crushed by the Inquisition. Because they weren't going to convert. You better believe that. Ain't no lizard folk worshiping Ra. Definitely not. So, that's a faction they could have had on their side, but was on the other side, and they felt bad about it and conflicted about it, and they wished they could have stopped it and could have made them friends instead of enemies. That's exactly the kind of drama you want, and that's the kind of drama you can bring out in a big mass combat. Because if they just become enemies, but they never actually have to fight each other, there's not as much payoff. Mass combats are payoff for your game. So invest in your game, and then when the mass combat comes around, you can get that back out of it. Our current game is Game of Thrones style, using a Song of Ice and Fire rule set, and the number of factions, it's obviously very large. As I love political games, but each faction brings something to the table in a battle. House Shawalter, House Biberdorf, House Hofstetler, and the home players are House Berengar. So those are the 4 local houses inside of the province. And depending on who the players ally with or who they piss off, when the mass combat comes around, the composition of their army or their side's army can be very different. And then geographically, if you move out, the neighboring provinces, House Nestal, House Krus, House Yerger, again, you never know who they're going to align with or who their bannermen are going to align with. And then add in, the beastmen from the forest, the hideous beastmen. Add in the orcs from the Black Mountains, the dwarfs from the Grey Mountains, ogre mercenaries. Add in the Tylean mercenaries and all the wealth of the wasteland, as well as the elves of Lorelorn Forest. Look at all the factions. So, if you ask me today, how is this mass combat going to work out in 6 months or 1 year? I can tell you how it would work out if it happened today. By the time we get there, the factions might be completely shuffled around, though. So that's one of the things I love as a GM, is I never know what's going to happen. That's my excitement as a GM. I don't know how it's going to play out. I just know there's going to be a battle, and the battle is going to be epic. So make your battles epic. Think about mass combats. Think about how to incorporate them in your game. I'm going to sign off now. I might even do another video on mass combats in the future. I love to double up on videos. So anything I miss, put in the comments below. I'll catch it next time. And also in those comments, please share your experiences. How have mass combats been great and fun? How have they been terrible and pedantic in your game? Share this information below. And I'm going to sign out right now. But everybody have a good day. And YouTube.